Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Shift, the podcast. This week, I interviewed Dr. David Hillis, who refers to himself as a lifestyle engineer. This was an awesome conversation, one of the best ones I think I've had. We dove into some really cool concepts, some really cool things that he's into. He gave some great recommendations. We talked about a lot of different books. Hopefully you enjoy it. And we're going to just jump right in the middle. I don't even remember where we were, but we were just talking, and this was the best place to dive in. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and I'm grateful you're here. As always, share it with a friend, like, subscribe, click on all the links, give us a rating. It really does help. We've crossed over. We're almost into 1,500 downloads, and I'm super excited about that. This is actually episode 50. So this is kind of a cool milestone for us to be hitting. And I can't wait for us to wrap up season 1, which is going to be another 5, 10, maybe 15 episodes. And then we will take a break for the summer. So in the meantime, enjoy this conversation with Dr. David Hillis.
I noticed on your Instagram that you refer to yourself as a lifestyle engineer, and that is obvious. That isn't something I'd heard or seen before. So I'm curious about what that means, or what that means for you. And
the beginning stages of a major pivot in my practice, so officially I haven't put everything out there yet. What I'm doing doesn't mean that I can chat about it, of course, but
Sure.
It's literally just in the past 3 months, everything is starting to come together. So it's a great shift. I get to say that COVID was an incredible blessing for my practice. Not because of the wonderful products that we have with doTERRA, but on the other end, it got everybody much more comfortable about being online for everything. And that's been a challenge for my practice, where I wanted to go for so many years. And I get it. Everybody wants to do the workshops and stuff that we do in person, because there's definitely that vibe and feel that you get. And I would prefer that. However, it limits what we can do. And there's so many folks that didn't want to step outside of that box, if you will. So COVID forced folks to do that. And I'm like, oh, sorry about your luck. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, it's been interesting how people have chosen to respond to the last year or so. It's been, in a lot of ways, it's been a blessing for us. I mean, we've seen an increase in our business. We've seen new projects come out of it because of COVID, and because of the way I saw so many people responding in fear and so sort of impacted in ways that I don't necessarily think they needed to be impacted, out of fear and just a lack of understanding, and sort of a lack of a willingness, or even just a trust that they could take control of their own life. It's kind of what sparked the reason for this podcast.
Okay.
I wrote a book 3-4 years ago called Choose Different. And it's very much saying, if you don't like where you're at in your life, it's because of the choices you've made. And so you get to choose differently. And when COVID hit, I was amazed, I guess. I don't know, maybe not amazed being the right word, but I was definitely sort of taken aback at how quickly people sort of threw their hands up and just decided to be like, in this holding pattern, versus recognizing like we get to choose, are we going to have a live time or dead time? And so for us, like, we already homeschooled, we already worked from home, we already did so many things that Americans have been forced into. And we saw it as an opportunity not to profit, but more as an opportunity to educate and to help others go, hey, we've been doing this pre-pandemic, we've been doing this before the government told us we had to, because we've always just sort of operated from a place that like we're accountable for our own. I shouldn't say always. That's probably not accurate. Like, when I chose to get sober is when I really started to take responsibility for, my own life.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's interesting how different industries have popped up and different people have taken advantage of, and it's a hard thing because you don't ever want to profit off of people's pain.
Yeah.
But the reality is that all businesses are there to resolve the pain point, right? Like that's
absolutely.
that's
Absolutely.
why
Like,
we
that's
spend
not
money
new.
is to solve problems.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. There's, I don't know how many, sales things that we've gone through that over the years of different companies. And that's what they're always poke at the pain and offer a solution. That's sales
Yeah.
101.
Yeah. I mean, it's really, I mean, it's so funny to me because people don't always, they always want to wrap it up in like nice bows and make it pretty and feel good. But like the reality is that everything we spend money on is there to resolve some sort of pain point,
Right.
even if it's
Yep.
just the pain of boredom, right?
Yep.
Entertainment is just there to solve my problems with boredom. So
Yeah.
it's interesting, because then people get stuck on like, well, I don't like to do sales, and it's like, well, but you're solving people's problems. Like that's a good
Yeah.
thing,
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's about that framing of the vocabulary that we're using, around it. So, within my practice or even working the oils business part of it, it's the same thing that people have that, but I'm not good at selling. And like, well, all right, we're going to just remove that from your vocabulary then. So what are you good at? Like, what do you like to do? What's your passion? So what is that? So then we just run it through that vocabulary instead. Okay.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, I totally can do this. I'm like, yeah, great.
Yeah.
Awesome. I know.
Yeah.
Now you know.
Yeah, programming is really interesting, especially when we think of it. And I don't know if you have children or not, but like we have a large family, and so I tend to really recognize programming when it comes into things that come out of my kids' mouth and things that I hear them say, and it's like, well, you didn't get that from me. So where is that coming from, or where is that, and it's so yeah, programming is definitely an interesting thing. And as adults, we like to pretend that we've not been programmed, because we're
Okay.
but I'm grown, I'm an adult, and it's like, yeah, but it's all programming from somewhere.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's my fun place that I like to work. So one of the podcasts that I'm beginning is Word Ninja is what I'm calling it. And it's all about the programming, because your words is the script that you're going to have for your next experience. If we don't change the wording, then that's what the experience is going to be that you get. So really identifying those words and then choosing the ones that you want to help you get aligned with that end action that you want. So people don't realize how important those words are. And most importantly, the internal dialogue that's happening, that's super important.
Yeah.
So I just thrive in that. I love, I'm like, ooh, bring it.
Yeah, that's so good.
Somebody's talking about. I just love it.
Yeah. So is that what you mean when you talk about being a lifestyle engineer? Is that
A huge part of it? Yeah. So a lifestyle engineer is reprogramming a lot of those things, giving the tools that people already have to help them be more directed and on point and laser focused of what it is they want to do, or more importantly, how is it that they're getting the results that they believe they should. So then we kind of back it through that. So whether I'm using hypnosis, mind management techniques, just visualization, meditation, energy-based therapies, any of those things, along with oils, kind of bring it all together. So it's that wonderful umbrella that brings all of those things together, because there's a lot of tools in the toolbox I just keep collecting because I'm like, oh, that's fun. I'm like, yeah, I don't like that. Let's do this. And so just finding that. So that lifestyle engineering is a trademarked term from a friend of mine, Sheila Granger, that's in the UK. Funny enough, her tagline is think differently. That was really funny when I heard your book. I was like, what? No.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. I was very intentional in that, because a lot of times it's like people say, well, make better choices, make better, do this. And it's like, well, I don't know that I'm in a place. I mean, I wasn't there when I wrote the book, and I'm probably even farther away from there today, feeling like I'm in a place to tell somebody what's good, better, or best, right? Like I have things that are really great for me, and I have things that I feel like are probably universal truths to some extent.
Sure.
But realistically, like my own personal views of like right or wrong or good or bad are pretty fluid. And things that I would consider to be, bad today were things that were good for me 15 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Because the place I was at 15 years ago, like that now bad choice for me was actually a better choice for me then. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
it's like, I was really intentional in just saying, if you don't like where you're at, if you don't know, or if things aren't going the way you want them to go, then choose different, because I, I don't know what's better. I don't walk your life. I don't live in your shoes. And so, yeah, I think different is a much better word. And I'm a big fan of like words have meaning and how words play. And my wife and I, we work on our business together, the projects that we work on together, and we have to create mission statements or things like that. Like those are some of our best discussions, because it's like, well,
Mm-hmm.
what does this word really mean? Like, what does it really
Yeah.
connotate, and how does it really feel? And the nuances between that um can sometimes really hold us up, and we have to like, okay, does it really matter? But sometimes I feel like it
Mhm.
does. I feel like it
Yeah.
really does.
Absolutely. Because from an energetic perspective, every word has a frequency and a vibration. And so it's an attracting pattern. So if it's not
Mhm.
the right thing that you're looking to have, then it would be more appropriate to have a better choosing a different word or phrasing it differently. So that, I mean, it's just like an instrument, I would think. I don't do music, but
Mhm.
if you're supposed to have a chord, that's what you're doing, well, then you tune it to that. You're not going to get some other chord if it's not tuned that way. So
Yeah.
if we don't look at it from that perspective, like an orchestra within our vocabulary that we're using, and main people wonder why they're not getting the results that they think that they should have. Well,
Yeah.
let's take a look. And I'm too the same with when I get to coach folks is I don't ever say that I know better than anything, so I'm still working it myself, so I still have my challenges that I get to work with and figure out too. What I get to do as that lifestyle engineer is help them then construct and formulate the way that they want to get to that place. So we're going to help them build where it is they're going,
Yeah.
and coordinating all of those different things are going to help them get there.
Yeah. That's awesome. I read I don't remember if I read it or if I heard it at a seminar I was at or watching. I mean, my wife and I spent a lot of time in like what's traditionally called personal development spaces. I don't, it's funny. I think that's kind of a misnomer, because like it's just growth, right? Like,
Mhm.
and none of it's done in a vacuum. So it's like the idea of personal development, I kind of find interesting, talking about vocabulary and words, because it's like, well, I'm not doing it on my own. I'm not doing it personally. Like, it's just a weird thing for me. But they were talking about vocabulary and how there's some studies out there that show that the stronger your vocabulary and the broader your vocabulary, the more sort of nuanced your actual thoughts and emotions are, because you actually have a better language base with which to like express and feel, right? It's like if you only know anger and confusion, then that's all you're going to feel, right? But if you understand anger and confusion and, you know, other nuanced ways of thinking about it or different words to apply, then you're actually able to like manage those emotional responses a lot better. And that was fascinating to me, to
Mhm.
think about how, what we know as words can actually impact how we feel and our emotional state,
Mhm.
which is,
Y-
I think, a really vulnerable place to get into with people, when it's like, you know, I don't think we talk enough about how to express ourselves
mhm.
and sit with that. And I've been really contemplating the phrasing "I don't know" lately. Like in our household, we don't really allow "I don't know."
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
because you do, like, my daughter did something the other day and it didn't make any sense and it ended in a small disaster. And so, the obvious question is, well, why did you do that? And she said, well, I don't know. So, well, that's the worst possible answer, because that means that you're acting without any intention. And for me, that's the root of a lot of problems, right? Is we're just
Right. Yeah.
doing something. And so we unpacked it a little bit, and she was like, well, we have a large family, and I thought that if I did more, it would make more sense, but I didn't have the tools to do it on that scale. And it was like, okay, well then, so that's a really, actually a really thoughtful and caring mess, right?
Right. Yeah.
You're thinking, because we have a large family, that you would do better by doing something in a grander scale, but in reality, you ruined a bunch of stuff.
Mhm.
But your heart was in the right place, and so that I can work with. Versus,
Sure.
I don't know, I just threw it all together, right?
Hmm.
So I love the idea of helping people to navigate that, and help them find the ways to express and create the tools for
Yeah,
them to
that
solve challenges.
that phrase, I don't know. I think it's almost probably come across pretty brass and rude in a workshop. So the first time somebody says I don't know, and my answer, I will stop them right as soon as it leaves their mouth. I'm like, you are too old to say I don't know. Unless you're a toddler, I don't accept that answer. No, you
Yeah,
might not think you know the answer right now, and we can totally work with that. Same thing is, but we need to look at it more. You don't get to use that excuse, because what it's come to equate now is to remove responsibility of the action that just happened.
so
Nope.
much.
So I'm like, nope, we're not doing that.
Yeah,
So nope. And so then backing it up just exactly like you guys did and unpacked all of that, pretty much that's what I started doing with folks. And it's so fun over the weekend, if I'm doing that workshop, whatever workshop it is, and it doesn't matter, and I call somebody out on it, then everybody starts really getting hyper aware of all their vocabulary, and they'll start to say it and they're like, okay, I don't quite know how I'm supposed to say this. I'm like, oh, awesome. This is
yeah,
growth. Yes. I'm like, so fumble it through and we'll make it fit and work. And
yeah,
so to me, that's some of the greatest growth within just working day to day with my clients. It's the same thing. And no, you don't get to say that. And same thing with try. Try is not in our vocabulary. Remove it if you're ever
hundred
going to work
percent.
with me, because it in the subconscious mind uses or thinks when we use the word try, we're giving permission to fail.
Yeah,
That's how the subconscious perceives it. And the subconscious doesn't have filters. It's just as it is. So very matter of fact, it doesn't have a buffer system. It just takes it as the actual truth.
yeah,
So when you tell that, then you just told yourself that you don't plan on actually making that happen. But I
yeah,
just said, I'm going to try. I'm like, no, is that you don't believe it, but you're going to make an effort. Well, just tell me you don't want to do it. I'm way better with that. Like, no, I don't want to do
yeah.
that. Okay, fine.
That's how I am. Yeah, we try in our household is another one. As is can't. There's,
Yes.
and I'm okay with can't if it's like, go lift that 500-pound thing, and it's like, well, I can't, and it's more like, well, you can't yet, right? Like, you can move
Right.
it, you just haven't found the way to do it. Versus, so there's
Mhm.
I can't yet, right? Which means I'm going to solve. But yeah, try is one of those things. I talk a lot about try. Trying is just not doing.
Mhm.
That's just all there is to it. Like,
Yep.
or another one that I really like is when, you ask someone or you engage in a conversation. It's like, well, can you do A, B, or C? And it's like, well, I should be able to. And I'm like, well, yes, you should. The question is,
It's
are you, it's like all these coping mechanisms we have to remove ourselves from accountability,
yeah.
right? And saying, well, I don't have time. And it's like, well, you do, because we all have the same amount. It's just how you choose to use it,
Mhm.
right?
Yes,
So I love that
absolutely.
mindset. I'm curious, how did you come to that place? Is that something that you were taught, when you were raised? Is that something that you fell into in your adult life? Like, how did you come to a place where you really wanted to start navigating those kinds of things?
Um, when it came down to, especially about the words, so originally, I guess the beginning phase of me looking at that and policing my own vocabulary was working with the law of attraction and knowing that everything that we're putting out there is coming back towards us. So as we're manifesting things or looking to manifest or any of those, whatever terms you want to use when we're trying to attract things in our life, that our vocabulary is super critical for being able to attract the exact thing that you're wanting and having. So that's where I started with really looking and identifying any of the limiting belief systems and all of those things. And then when I met Sheila Granger, we were in Toronto for a training, and she was talking about the whole world of hypnosis and where it's going and where it's come from and that kind of thing. And through a lot of that training, it was just becoming super, super clear to me that people don't realize they're their own hypnotist, because every word they're saying is going directly into their subconscious mind, as well as everyone outside of that, if they're taking it in. So if they're sitting in front of a doctor just because they have a white coat, that's the truth. No, it's their truth. Potentially it's not yours. If you choose to make it, then that's yours. So that's really where that started going, because knowing that I needed to be super clear about every word that I say if I'm literally dumping it into somebody's subconscious mind in the therapy realm. So if I'm doing hypnosis, it's kind of like I'm in the mainframe, and changing all of that stuff. So I need to be, it's not a place that you flub a word kind of thing, so you want to make sure that those intentions with every single word is absolutely crystal clear so that it can be carried out. And then I just started, I just love that understanding of that. So then I started getting even more refined in how I use my own words again. And it's just that constant always monitoring those things and then changing it of like, no, wait, that's not what I mean. What's the word? Okay. And then we kind of go through it so I can feel the vibration of it. Like, okay, that's closer, still not it. And so that's why I love teaching folks that, because you're already using it. It's not a new skill that anybody needs. You're already using it. Let's just do it in a more healthy way for you so that it's more aligned with the life that you're wanting to have. And we were talking a little bit earlier, so that those words and the framing, and the more words and vocabulary that you have or that you're educated in, expands your world in so many different ways, from the emotion to your outlooks and everything else with that bigger vocabulary. But think about even just in a community, or our tribal systems. So within your tribe, they all have a set of words that they use to describe things that they all accept as the tribe. That's kind of putting a parameter around how much you can grow, because you're going to only be able to see what's in the tribal belief system. So if you don't have that education outside of that, then you're still going to always be stuck in that tribe, meaning your family, community, whatever that is. And so it's super important to me to keep expanding that as much as possible for everyone. And so sometimes it's just entering in. So in my word, or in my world, this word would be this. And so just helping them swap things out with my clients. And when we're talking about anything, and it's literally that live streaming. So yeah, we're talking about Reiki, the Japanese healing art, and that's the workshop we're in. But the entire time, I never choose to turn it off. And so there's always that filter for me, and I'm okay. So how about, and we walk it through that way. And so every time I'm seeing it, but I'm reading what their intention is, and it didn't match the word, then it's bringing that forward. And I didn't realize how much of a impact that really could make on so many folks, that they weren't even aware that they were self-sabotaging themselves or self-limiting with just the words that they're using. And so I absolutely love getting to have conversations, especially years in that I've worked with somebody, and watch them always reframing and changing, or they'll text me and like, hey, I have to have this important meeting, or my family's going through this. What is something that we can bring to the table that's going to have the most impact? And so we'll literally just talk it out, kind of thing. And I love that. To me, that's just so much fun. For me, it's a huge passion of mine. That's just how it came to be, really. So
Yeah.
Mostly because of that I did a speech with a whole bunch of doctors and executives for a hospital system, where they can get all of their continuing education credits like in one day. So it's like this buffet of continuing ed credits they can do. And so I got to do this talk, and my whole thing for them was, who in the room is a hypnotist, who's a hypnotherapist? And of course, none of them, and especially the medical community here in West Michigan, they're like, no, not one person. I'm like, okay, so what I need everybody to do is raise your hand, because everyone is hypnotizing yourself, your family, your tribe, and most importantly, because you wear that coat that you're wearing, you're hypnotizing your patients. So how about we gain some skills so we can be much more on board with their success of wherever it is that you're wanting them to go. If we can start offering questions, possibilities, open-ended, so that they're being able to fill that in, as opposed to you telling them that you have 3 to 6 months to live. We know that's never truth. It might be sooner or later, but it's still ultimately them. So keep them in the driving seat. Let them know how you've arrived at this,
Yeah.
and giving the option out, if you will. This is my truth. Doesn't have to be yours. Run it through your circuits to see where it sits and how it feels for you.
Yeah. I love
Throw it
that.
out or don't.
It's such an interesting thing, and the journey sounds like it's been amazing for you. And I love that you're using the gifts that you have to expand possibilities for people, right? Because I think a lot of people hear things like hypnotherapy or Reiki, and they just don't understand it, right? And we fear what we don't understand. Very much the same with essential oils and a lot of the things that
Yeah.
I think people experience. It's fascinating to me because our family has chosen to sort of opt out of a lot of the traditional structures that exist. We've been homeschooling for 13, 50, 15 years now, maybe longer. And we don't participate in Western medicine regularly. My wife had a major stroke, obviously. She had great care and great attention. I've got a couple kids that have broken bones or needed stitches and things of that nature. But for the day-to-day and the normal stuff, we choose to opt out of a lot of that. And part of that is exactly what you were saying, is that they run a test, they do what they're trained to do. It's kind of like that old adage, everything looks like a nail to a hammer, right? And it's like, and then that you're told, well, your child is behind in reading, or your child is this, or you have this. Or even when my wife had her stroke, we really struggled and had a somewhat adversarial relationship with her care providers, because they went off of what they knew or what they understood. And when we presented what we thought were valuable options, or viable options, I should say, it wasn't even up for discussion. And it was like, well, wait a minute, like this is supposed to be a collaborative effort. Ultimately, yes, you're trained and you're a professional, and it's my body, it's my choices. And it was like, no, this is what you need to do. And I'm fascinated by the society or the structures that we've created, where, and a lot of times those people, they're well intentioned, but they're also acting out of fear, because if they say go ahead and do that thing and it doesn't work, they're afraid I'm going to sue, right? And then there's liability. And it's like we've just moved farther and farther and farther away from accountability for our own actions, right? Because I mean, I shouldn't say I would never sue, but my choices are my choices, and the results of my choices are mine to own, not to blame that on someone else. And so I'm curious, what was the response when you challenged, the room full of white coats to say, hey, you're all doing this, and let's give you some better tools, and let's reframe some of that language.
It was, a collective, especially initially, there was this collective, I felt it, feedback of like, okay, shouldn't have signed up for this workshop.
You're like going into the lion's den, right?
Yeah, because it was funny because I could just see them all like looking across the room at each other, and I couldn't count how many eye rolls. And so I said, so I get that this is probably something really new for all of you, but let's just test this, shall we? Let's go through. And I actually did an exercise about I did a lot, especially for hypnosis, about lemons. And so I have everybody, I walk them through this little thing about smelling a lemon, feeling it, and you're going to bite into the lemon. And what I love is because what happens, the subconscious actually, the more you really get into it, the subconscious doesn't know the difference between imagination and reality. So what will happen, and that was the aha moment that I loved watching all of them try to not agree with, is that when you go to bite into the lemon that's not in your fingers, you started producing more saliva because your subconscious believed you were taking in an acid. So it was creating more saliva to neutralize that acid. And they couldn't deny that was happening in their mouth, even if they didn't, like, they kept their hands folded and weren't going to do it, but they recognized that there was still saliva. So I'm like, at some point you probably got a little bit more, or you had to just swallow a little bit more. And I'm like, and you don't have to agree or not, but might want to think that maybe these are some things that you might want to just take a look at. Not that you need to be completely on board with, but let's just be more mindful of the words that we're using with our folks that we're doing and giving them the tools. So if you tell them they're going to be dying in 6 months, there's a lot of folks that don't know any better, that they don't have to take that as their truth. And we're not even in the woo-woo category yet of prayer or, any of that.
Right.
So we got lots to do, but this is actually clinical data that we can actually support and show you. So let's just stay in that scientific world, because that's where I know most of us are in when we're in the medical field. And so that's how I just walked it through, and they really softened, and then we're having fun with it. And I try to make it interesting and making jokes. And I said, so, your docs that have the docs that have their own private practice and everything else, if you want more stuff done or more cohesive environment within your office, you can offer things as suggestions, especially if somebody is in a daydream or they're thinking about something else. And if you just happen to walk by, it'd be so nice if that just got dropped into their subconscious mind, so these are things that we could change and do to make things much better. And one of the things, even as a massage therapist, I do not ever say how bad something is, as like your shoulder's so bad or your back is, the stretching, whatever it is. It's always from a positive place. I always give it from a positive. I'm like, well, it's still working. There's blood flow.
Yeah.
Win.
So it's the power of suggestion
go,
is so much stronger than I think people realize. And I think people underestimate how we frame things. My wife and I did a program called 75 Hard back in the fall. And, it's 75 days of working out and eating a certain way and, drinking a gallon of water a day and certain things like that. Right. And she was way more excited about it than I was. Because I'm not so much of a rule follower. I don't like having to do certain things. And, but I was like, all right, I'm up for the challenge. Let's give it a shot. But what I found that was really interesting was a couple of weeks into it, she was sharing her journey. And because she's a stroke survivor, people would private message her and say, hey, that's really dangerous for you. Or like, you shouldn't be doing that. Or like, this could cause this problem or that problem. And then she started to really second guess herself. And there was a ton of fear. And I was like, look, I'm like, you were crushing it until somebody said this might happen. And now you're making it happen. Like it didn't even happen. You're manifesting that reality for yourself. Like, so I've had to really sort of like tune out those things, or I find that like I just did a podcast about this that's not been released yet, but it's talking about how confidently incorrect we are so many times. like instead of saying you shouldn't do that or this is going to do this to you, like framing it in a way that opens possibilities, but ones that have a positive impact, right? Like I feel like we all live in this world. None of us live in a vacuum, right? And so we're always having impact on one another. I mean, you and I are having this conversation. I don't know how many people are going to hear it. I don't know how they're going to respond to it, but I know that it's going to have an impact of some sort. You're impacting me right now. I'm impacting you right now. And we get to choose, like, is that going to be a positive impact or is that going to be a negative one?
Right.
And it's rarely neutral. And I feel like so many times we're just sort of parroting the programming that we've heard and not being intentional and going, well, I know that I don't have control over how you receive the information I give you, but I do get to choose whether I present it in a positive light and as a way that can empower you, or I get to present it in a way that's more disempowering.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm hoping that through conversations like this, people will reflect back on their own actions and go, well, I could have been more empowering. I could have been less disempowering. I could have been right. And they get to make that choice. Like for me, it's like as a content creator, it's like I just create it and then it goes out into the world and it does what it's going to do. And I don't have any say in that. I just can put it out there with the proper intention or with my good intention. And then hopefully it resonates and has impact. I'm curious what you think about when you go into a space like that and you start to shift some minds, you start to plant some seeds, which is kind of what we're talking about, right?
Yep.
And then if you were to go back 6 months, a year, 2 years later, how many of those aren't nurtured into something else, right? Like, I feel like, especially in the category of Western medicine, which, my intention wasn't to like have a conversation to crap on that. Because I certainly don't dislike Western medicine. I think it has its purpose, but when you go into a situation like that, I'm curious what you think maybe like some of the larger barriers are that prevent people from really, because like you said, we're not even getting into the woo-woo stuff. Like, we're not even getting into like Joe Dispenza and like, some of the really nutso like,
Yeah.
you'll never walk again. Oh yeah, watch this. Type of like neuroplasticity and those sorts of things. Like, we're not even getting into that. Like, this is just basic human interaction, really.
Yeah.
I'm curious what your thoughts are on like why that is received so negatively, or why there's so many eye rolls and
Well, I think most of it boils down to having the accountability. Is they don't want the responsibility to recognize that they actually have that power with every word that they say. That's the biggest thing, because they don't know what that's supposed to be. That's nowhere in their curriculum. So I don't know how to do that. So why would I do that? Because I don't know how much I can or can't do with it, kind of thing. So if I don't agree with it or say that it works, I don't have to be held accountable to that.
Yeah.
And what I am accountable is the science that they bring. And like, so this is what the test says.
Yeah.
There's no accountability.
It's really interesting because, and we'll shift gears here in a second, but like as a medical professional who's kind of tasked with doing no harm and bringing people to a closer state of health, if they were to look at that accountability through that same lens, like most of the things that we're doing to resolve health issues aren't solving the issues, they're just masking symptoms.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's part of the other thing too, is like for us, it was really hard for me when my wife came to me. So we have 8 children. Our first 3 were born in a hospital. Our 4th child was born at home. And our 2nd child lived in the NICU for 2 weeks. Like, we almost lost him. He had major health concerns and health issues. And so like, I'm grateful for those tools and those skill sets that saved his life. And when my wife came to me when we were pregnant with our 4th child, she was like, "Hey, I want to do a home birth." I was like, I don't have all those machines at my house. Like,
You're right.
I'm not capable of doing those things. And it was all this fear and all this real lack of understanding of like the bigger picture of like how humans are created and how, pre 1930, everybody was born at home. And you go pre 1800s, like everybody, like it wasn't even a consideration that some strange man would tie you down to a bed and help you birth your child. Like, that just wasn't. So it was interesting to me to really pull back and go, okay, why am I afraid of this? And like the accountability piece was really a big one, is like, we're so mired sort of in this fear that we can't handle hard things. And like, when we had our first home birth, the midwife sort of sat there and just observed, and she didn't really engage until like the head was crowning and the baby was coming. And I was mad at her the whole time. I didn't say anything, but inside I was kind of like, why aren't you doing anything? Like, why aren't you? Because all my other kids, there's a nurse poking and prodding and taking. And then after the baby was born, I was like, oh shit, this is going to happen with or without her. Like, this is how God made women's reproductive systems to work. And all that programming I had about how it was supposed to work went out the window. And it was like, I'd never even thought to question it.
Yeah. Right.
It's like just what we knew. And I wonder if we're not just so sort of wrapped up in our own fears of being wrong or not trusting in what our capabilities are, that we've come to a place where, like, if somebody with a piece of paper on the wall, whether it's an attorney or a doctor or a teacher or a I mean, someone at the DMV, right? Like they tell us this is how it is and we just go, okay.
Yeah.
And we move on.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that when I get to work with folks that are, a lot of times they get a terminal diagnosis or they could be towards the end of things of their life. And the important thing for me is to find out that vocabulary of, where are those limiting belief systems? Does dying have to be a horrific thing? Does it have to be painful on the way out? Does it, all of those things, what are their belief systems? And then also what happens afterwards for you in your vocabulary? And so then reframing some of that stuff, well, maybe, and it's literally just suggestions. And they're like, oh, I didn't think of that. Oh yeah, I guess that is a possibility.
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Let's see if we can dive into that a little bit more. And that's really, I think when we take that, even though it's more responsibility for what we're doing and being, but it's liberating at the same time. It's all that freeing part of it, because all of those other expectations don't play a role. Your expectations don't play a role in my script. So I'll take it under advisement. And that's what I train everybody that works with me when they're seeing a medical professional is, I need you to stay. And that's a strong word, need, because that's a survival word, but it is, I need you to stay in the place that you'll take it under advisement. It might be pretty right spot on, but there's a potential that it isn't. They're giving you the information that they have and what they see and outcomes that they can predict or believe could happen or probable. But that's it. They don't have a crystal ball that is 100%. I do have a crystal ball and it's still not 100%.
I love it. I love it. I think this is a really great place to sort of shift gears, because I want to talk a little bit about belief. Because that's something that we've kind of touched on a few times. And there's Eckhart Tolle has this great quote, and I don't remember where I heard it. I want to say, and I can't even remember now. But it was in a book that he wrote about 10, 15 years ago. And he talks about belief. And he says, well, when you formulate a belief, what you're actually doing is you're shutting the door to all and other possibilities, right? Like, so I love the way you were talking about, like, is this a possibility? Are you open to this idea? Is this maybe true? And I think, and I'm really curious about your thoughts on this, but I feel like people say they believe one thing, but their actions don't support it. And I think that's where a lot of the tension and the sort of like confusion and frustration and misalignment comes in, is because people will quote the meme, or they'll share the really great heartfelt language, but their actions don't support it, and they know it deep down, right? Because like as a Christian, people always talk about how afraid they are to die. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. If you're a Christian, when you die, the idea is that you go to heaven and you sit at the foot of Jesus. Why are you afraid of that? Like, if you really believe that that's what's going to happen, then death shouldn't be a fearful thing. Like that's like the end goal, isn't it?
Right.
Like we talk about that in a way, not that like I want to go jump off a cliff, because, I think that the journey is equally as important, but I get a lot of flack from people when they say, well, I believe this. And I'm like, but nothing that you do in your, in your actions supports that belief.
Yeah.
Because they're out of alignment. And so I'm curious, like, is that something that you press up against when you're sort of coaching people and they're like, but this is how it is? And you're like, oh yeah, poke.
Always. And that's just a really fun day for me. So I loved, and it's not so much about pushing the envelope, but yeah, it is. In any subject, that's where I like to be.
Yeah, right on the edge, right?
Absolutely. And it's, when it comes to that belief system, I will question every belief that someone will give me. And I welcome them to do the same for me, because one, I'll never sell my belief to anyone. I will tell you why and how I arrived at it, And if that fits for you or some parts of it, great. Actually, that is usually how I start any workshop that I do is, so throughout the weekend, I'm going to be presenting a whole lot of different ideas and philosophy, what I need you to do. And I promise I will always give you my truth. And what I need for all of you to do is just run it through your circuits, see what fits for you, find out where some of this fits. Does it feel right? Does it seem like it's right? Is it right for you? Is it right for you at this time? That's all I need from any of you to do.
Yeah.
At the end of it, you can adopt part, all, whatever you choose and make it your truth. But just know it's mine, does not have to be owned by you at all. I'm not asking for anyone's approval or their stamp of that's definitely a truth. No, it is mine.
Yeah.
And so then with that, at the end of the weekend or whenever the workshop is done, hopefully you found some things that maybe got you to understand why you do have a belief system and what that is, because that's, to me, the most important part is how did you arrive at that belief?
Yeah.
And is it your belief or is it your tribal belief?
And a lot of times I feel like, and you said something that I think is really important, is like, kind of listen to it and see if it works for you right now. Because I have very few, like, what I would call beliefs, right? Like what I would actually call beliefs. I use the term belief all the time. I say, well, I believe this to be true, or I believe that to be true. When in reality, it's like, I currently in this moment think this is most likely the, like most likely to be accurate. For me, that's what a belief is, right? It's like it's like science. Like everything is scientifically proven until it isn't, right? And so beliefs for me are very similar to that. Like I currently feel like this is probably the most accurate representation of what I know to be true. And as I continue to take in data and as I continue to take in information and play with it and use it and kind of put it on trial, right? Like there's things that I thought as an 18-year-old that I look back and I go, well, once I actually put that to practice, it fell apart horribly, Yeah. But there's also things that I've heard in workshops I've been in or books that I've read or coaches that I've worked with that in that moment was like, that's bullshit. I'm not going to apply that today. But years down the road, I go, oh, he said, and I'm learning that tends to apply more today than it did then. Right. And I think that's the power of like questioning everything and choosing to like take in the data. It's helpful that I like to learn and read and have these kind of rambling conversations about how the world works.
Right.
Not everybody does that, and not everyone has the time freedom, which I recognize. But I do think we have the ability to sort of choose, am I going to watch, 4 hours of Netflix or an hour of Netflix and read these articles or listen to these, podcasts or do those things. So I'm curious, what type of stuff do you consume that helps you to kind of navigate, like you got, I noticed you posted a few times things about the 4 agreements, which is, I think is a brilliant work. But I'm curious, like what other kind of things are feeding into that for you?
It's the universal library, really. I always am wanting to dive into everybody's perceptions and belief systems. Because for me, I'm just always wanting to know how they perceive whatever it is that is a truth for them. And so I love, for me, my pastime and fun is learning. So that's just, when I was camping, I would still be on my iPad if we're sitting by the fire and I'm reading a new text material stuff because I just want to keep feeding more. And there's a lot of times I'm like, that is crap, whatever. And I'm like, but good for you. You got a book out there. And, so it's just taking all of that stuff in. And again, that's how I came up with my truth of what is any of my truths is they need to be backed up by one, how I felt. And then I need to also see those results also. So bridging that gap from that Western philosophy, even in scientific mind in medicine, but then also bringing in the more esoteric teachings from all over too. And that's kind of what is there for me. So I allow the universe to keep presenting me with whatever it is that I need to take a look at next. And that's when I post stuff, it's really funny that everybody thinks that like, wow, I needed to hear that today. I'm like, great. And what they don't understand is that was my morning meditation stuff of like, okay, guys, what do I need to focus on today? Let's bring it in. So I start looking and just scrolling, doing whatever. And I'm like, oh, here we are. And we stop. And I'm like, all right. So I literally just start taking some of those things apart. And what I love, especially now, is that it's just getting, there's so many feeds everywhere. So I let the universe like spin the DJ kind of thing. Like, what are we listening to today?
Nice.
Awesome. And it could be something that is like, what? That is so not what I'm listening to today. Yeah. But I always honor it. And I'm like, all right, fine. All right, I'm listening.
Yeah. It's really interesting because, you know, the theory used to be that, you know, knowledge was power, and it was like the lack of access to information is what was holding humanity back. Well, now we have the internet where all the information is available to almost anyone at almost any given time. So it clearly wasn't the lack of information that was because, you know, so then we have to factor in this piece of like discernment, right? And this like, and that's kind of the place that I'm at right now, is like I'm on like this like journey for wisdom. Like I love information, I love knowledge, and I love what you said about kind of letting the universe be the DJ. And it's like, okay, this is what you're putting in front of me, but like, I really don't like what I'm hearing, or I don't love the message, or it's not really serving me. But the reality is that the seed is planted. You've now been exposed to, like, you know, one of my favorite sayings is like, you can't unring a bell, right? It's like when somebody tells me something, it's like, well, I can't unhear it.
Yep.
So there's a reason I needed to hear it. And I'm just going to put it on the shelf because it doesn't really serve me today, or I'm not really liking. And sometimes I think things are brought to our awareness to highlight the things we need to stay away from.
Absolutely.
Like, you know, it's not necessarily like just because somebody, you know, I mean, I've fired coaches before, and I've stepped out of workshops and thought, you know, I'm going to listen. There'll be some nuggets that'll serve me at one point, but it may be that I'm here to learn how not to do certain things.
Right.
And that's okay too.
I actually welcome that with, especially in my own journey, is that what I call that is the contrast. So I know the universe has always hit me with a lot of contrast of things that like, no, I remember a time when that was true. So glad I'm not there. And like, hey, how far have I come? And what more do I know about that now? So if some of the older stuff that I'm like, what? Are you kidding me? Why am I? No, don't need to do this. But all right, my only job is to stay in neutral and let's see what that feels like. And so when I do that, then that allows me, again, that contrast space of, yeah, wow, I didn't even realize how far away that from a truth that was for me. And now knowing, you know, so it's that wonderful reminder of why it isn't good for me, or it doesn't align with me. And so I'm always thinking that that's still a plus, that's a win. But the only way that I can do that is if I remain in neutral when I'm being presented with anything.
Yeah.
And whether that's, and I think that's what I try to get most folks to do as I'm working with them, is if you will give yourself the gift of staying in neutral for the entire weekend or however long I get to work with you, that's going to be the best place for you, most likely, to come out on the other side of it more intact with who you are. And you will be able to be a higher version of what that is. That still also could mean that you think I need to be on medicine at the end of the weekend. I'm totally all right with that.
Right.
But you know, that's not you.
Yeah. I love the idea of staying
win.
in neutral. That's not a phrase that I've necessarily heard before. And I like that. Two things come to my mind as we're talking in this moment. One is I've been accused of using, so like when I'll go into a workshop a lot of times, or, you know, we go to these seminar weekends, and it's, you know, one of the first questions they typically ask is like, what is your expectation? And I get flack because my answer to that is typically I come into these things with very low or little expectation, because I feel like
two different things.
you know, like for me to come into something with an expectation, then you know, the root of all suffering is unmet expectations. So if I come into something that I've never participated in, I don't know the presenters, I don't know what's happening, and I create an expectation, I'm actually setting myself up for failure.
Right.
Is the way that my brain sort of looks at it. So I like to go into those things like, I'm a clean slate, I have no expectation, so whatever happens, and I'm going to take the information and I'm going to just try to be present with everything, and then move on from there. And a lot of times I get, well, that's a cop out. Like, you're here for a reason. And I'm like, well, the reason I'm here is because my wife made me come, or it was a good ticket price, or it was like, that's different than what my expectation is. So I like the idea of staying in neutral. And I wonder if that's that sort of idea of staying in neutral. Has anyone presented that to you as like being a bit of a cop out, or being, or not that you don't seem like the type of individual who would care if they did or not, but I'm curious of your thoughts on just that experience. I have another question I want to ask you.
If I say the word, if I actually use neutral, then no, I usually don't get much, because people don't know what to do with that usually. They just don't. Like,
this is true.
Is he in or not, or is he just being a jerk? What I don't get, like, they just have that. I'm like, that's great. Let's go with that then. Let's stay there, because it is that clean slate. That is what I'm doing, and I'm giving you the opportunity, whoever it is that I'm working with or watching, participating in, for you to deliver whatever it is that you're going to deliver without anything from me. And so if I step outside of neutral, then I'm not allowing you to be the best version of that you're intending to be. And so that's kind of, and when I teach medical intuition, that is super critical of a skill that you have to know, and have to is survival to be accurate in a medical intuitive perspective. So if you're not neutral, then you've got an investment on the outcome of whatever it is you're about to deliver.
Yeah.
So super critical.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. I like that phrasing. And I think, you know, we talked about language and that kind of thing. And so I think that really aligns for me in thinking along those terms. The other question that I had that came up is, you know, you've mentioned a few times, like, what's true for you, right? Like your truth. And I know that sort of ideology has become a trend, right? Like, well, my truth is this and my truth is that. And so I kind of want to push back on that a little bit and ask you, you know, do you think that there's a danger of that being sort of manipulated? You know, like when I talk to you about it, like I can tell that you're talking about sort of these esoteric things, right? But we also see, like, in these social constructs, I think we see people using my truth as a way to say, you're not, like, your stuff is BS and not valuable to me, and I'm not going to engage with you because, like, I see it as a weapon sometimes. Like,
absolutely is. It is definitely.
And I'm curious, from your perspective, someone who like works in this space, what's the counter to that? Like, how do you identify, like, when someone's being authentic and genuine about talking about, like, you know, things that are what I believe to be like personal truths versus like, you know, the sun comes up and it goes down every day. Like, I feel like that's kind of a universal truth we can all kind of look at it and agree to. You know, maybe it's not going up, it's going around, but okay, you know, I get it. I get you want to dissect the semantics of it. That's fine. But like, as someone who's in that space, I'm curious how you sort of discern what that looks like and what it means when it's authentic, and how you kind of identify when it's being weaponized, and what to do about that. Because I do talk to people and they'll start to drop that kind of language, and I'm just like, I don't know how to help you without telling you you're just full of crap in this moment. Like, I would love to have better tools to know how to communicate in that space.
I love that. So one, I don't ever play fair, ever. I tell everybody that whenever I work with anybody, and anybody that is in any type of relationship, friend, professional, doesn't matter. I don't play fair, because I'm reading the energy that's coming. So every word, like I talked about before, every word does have that frequency and vibration. So I'm actually reading from them. If that has some resonance in it, does it actually have something behind it? Or are they using it exactly that because they're trying to manipulate the situation, and it's a power control move. And so usually it's really simple. If you don't have that option to be able to look at the skill set about reading the energy, for anyone else probably is just to go in just a little bit like, that's your truth. Like, how did you get there? If you step maybe 2 steps into that truth and asking them like, that's fascinating, I want to talk to me more about that. How did you arrive at that truth? The moment that happens, you will absolutely know without a shadow of a doubt if you're about to have tribal warfare, because you literally just exposed the foundation of what they said was a truth. And if they can't defend it because they know why it's that way, and it's not all internal how I arrived at it, then it's power management is all it is. And
I
so
love that.
it's just done. Nope. That might be your tribe's truth. Don't know that it's yours. So we're going to take that and going to eject that out of this conversation, because you're not manipulating how we're going to work with this.
Interesting.
And people are like, I'm like, I'm not invalidating you, but I'm going to challenge what you just said. And let's talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah.
I want to hear what you feel and think. I'm not trying to invalidate that whatsoever. What I want to do is find out how you've arrived here and at that point, or that is so important to you, because I want to honor it. That is something that is super important to you. I just want to make sure that I'm on that same viewpoint as you are. Not that it's going to be mine, but I want to honor it in the way that you're presenting it for you.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that question. How did you arrive to that? And I find that like questions are usually the best way to like seek understanding. I have a friend of mine who taught me a tool in asking, what am I missing here? Right? Like a lot of times people will say things or do things and you're just like, what? And it's like, okay, I'm the idiot. Help me understand what am I missing here?
Mhm.
And that has been such a great tool in my own toolbox when I enter into conversations with people. And when I want to say, well, like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard, I don't necessarily reply with that. It's like, okay, wow, I really don't understand that. What am I missing? And because everything seems to have become so polarizing, and one of the sort of outs that I think people are using to avoid the accountability of exactly what you're asking them is, well, how did you get to that truth? And so I've started to ask the question of, what am I missing? Someone will share something or post something, or even in human conversation is limited to those have been this last year. It's like, wow, I really don't like, what am I missing? Because like 2 and 2 is 4. And what you're sharing is that it's 17. So like,
right.
help me understand. So I love
Absolutely.
that extra question to be able to ask is, well, how did you arrive at that truth? Because I think most people, their response is like, well, that's my truth. So like, I don't have to explain it to you.
Yeah.
Right? And it's like, well, wait a minute.
Yeah. And that's when they start posturing like that, then that it's a very different game that we're playing at this moment. And it actually is the game. It's not about actually wanting, because if it is a truth and it's something they've grown into and adapted, then they've got the curriculum behind it, and that's what they're going to share. If it's like, well, it's just my truth, it doesn't have to be yours. If they come across in that defensive mechanism, and posture, then you're like, okay, we both know right now that you're talking out of your ass.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's really interesting to me. And I do get a lot of flack from people who think that I'm being argumentative or even arrogant, when it's like, well, help me understand how you got to that. And it's like, I really truly want to know why you believe what you believe. And what I found is that when they get defensive and they get into that space, it's, or, and then you start playing like all these like whataboutisms and all these other different things, right? And they start bringing up other arguments or he said, she said stuff. And it's like, well, wait a minute. No, I'm not saying that you're wrong. I'm asking you to justify or explain how you came to your beliefs. Like, I have the beliefs that I do have. I can walk you through, like, here are the 4 things that took me from not believing that to believing that. And you're welcome to poke holes in those 4 things, because if I'm missing something, I want to know, because like for me, a core value, a belief structure is something I'm building my foundation on. And if it's faulty, gosh, I want to know before it comes crumbling down.
Right.
Right. Like, I think that's like being honest, which kind of leads me into this other area that I've been kind of trying to unpack lately is humans' resistance to being honest. And I don't necessarily mean being a liar, because my wife and I had this really great conversation about this the other day, because we were working through some stuff, and I was like, look, I just need you to be honest with me. And she got really mad at me. And I was like, whoa, what did I say? Like, wait a minute. And she's like, I am not a liar. And I was like, well, I never said you were a liar. But for her, the equation was dishonest equals lie. And I'm like, well, okay, I see that. So let me rephrase it. And great that we were able to unpack like the language of that. But what I'm really getting into is like, be truthful about who you are, what you want, and this is an area where I feel like I don't know is okay. Like, I don't know what I want. Like, I'm truly confused. Okay, great. But I'm wondering, like, in your experience, in the work that you do, is honesty a thing that you work with? And do you challenge people in that? Is it hard? Do you find it hard for people to be honest?
That's probably not a fair question or a fair assessment on most folks, because for me, honesty is the only thing that shows up. Otherwise, we don't work together. It's a non-negotiable. Because I will be 100% honest with you about anything and everything if we're having the conversation.
Okay.
I might not like what I actually have to share, but I will absolutely, and I'm going to walk you through it.
Yeah.
And so I only accept the same from you, because I can only help you change, move into where you want to go if we're on that same thing, on that same path, and with that absolute honesty. You can at any point say, I would prefer not to talk about it, and I will take that and honor it. But to tell me a lie about it, no.
In your practice, that makes sense. But do you find that outside of your practice, where maybe the ground rules haven't been laid, right? Like, we're just having human interaction.
Yeah.
Do you think that that's the same playing field?
I still treat it the same, because to me, in my practice and outside my practice, there isn't a difference. So I still do every day. And that doesn't, if I was at the grocery store and somebody said, to be honest, and I'm like, and I do that. I step back and look at them like, so I'm supposed to erase everything you just said before that, because what you just told me is that none of that was true. And they're like,
right,
what? And I'm like, that's what you just said. So to be honest, I'm like, what? Hold the phone. No.
Yeah.
I don't know that I want to erase everything that you just said, because if that's the case, I don't know that I want to continue the conversation if that was all false. And that's what you just presented to me. Is that what you're telling me? And if it is, good luck to you. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
And I'm out.
Yeah. See, I think it is. I think most people, and this might be hard for some people to hear, I think most people live in a world of fantasy. Like, they're not really being truthful to who they are. And I don't know how this really came to my awareness, but it has in the last couple of months, and this might actually be sort of a COVID symptom, right? Of the last year, of seeing people talk one way and do something else. Or I find a lot of times, if you engage in conversation, you ask people the questions, a lot of times they're not able to answer. They're paralyzed with not knowing how to answer, because rather than telling you, answering the question with what they really want or what they really think, they're thinking about, how are you going to receive it? How does this impact everyone else? Which on the surface is like, okay, that's compassionate because we're considering other people's feelings. But on the flip side, it's like, it's just dishonest. We're not being truthful to who we are. And I've kind of also landed on this place where it's like, I want to shift the connotation of the word selfish. Like, there needs to be another word for selfish, because I feel like people are like, oh, I don't want to tell you what I want, because that's I don't want to be selfish. And it's like, no, you need to honor who you are and be real and be truthful. You can do all those things without being cruel. and we can certainly make compromises, like you and I engaged in this podcast, and, I said, what's a day and a time that works for you, and we do that back and forth of like, well, what's good for you? No, let's start with here, and then we can compromise from there, and we can make,
Sure.
concessions. But if we don't know what we want and we don't know who we are, then, we wake up one day and we don't have a voice, and we're a victim, and we're miserable, and we're depressed. Right. So like, as I've been navigating this conversation lately, like I've kind of landed in like, and the whole point of the podcast is vulnerability and accountability, but it's starting to drive also towards like, that requires honesty also.
Yeah. Yeah.
This
It's
is
the main
what I want.
ingredient. Otherwise, you don't get to those other two places. You can't identify them. You can't work with them. You can't, spread your wings in it and really get to feel with those. You don't know what authenticity is if you can't be true to yourself,
Yeah.
because it's a fake. It's not authentic. It's who you're manufacturing to be.
Yeah.
And I do believe that there's a caution, I think, because of COVID and everything, and especially how polarizing things are on the planet, with trying to accommodate everyone and not offend anyone. And I don't subscribe to that whatsoever, because I know my intention is not to offend someone. If it is, you're totally going to know. I'm like, there's no question. No, I'm looking to offend you. Yep. And I'm standing behind it. Like, you are being an ass.
Yeah, right.
And I can say that. In the words, though, I get to back up, because you are being, and you are completely different. And so they start to posture like, you don't know me. I'm like, you're right. I don't know you, but I do know what you're doing right now, and that's being an ass. That's where it is. And let's just get to, when we get to that part of it, that honesty and truth for one. If when I make an observation, or if I'm adding something, or especially an observation, because I do that a lot, I will say, I preface it by, this is what I'm seeing. And am I seeing that accurately? That gives them the opportunity to level it out, and to fine tune it, to make sure that it is what they're trying to say, or what they're trying to project. And there's always I'm not coming from, it's to try to learn. If we set out, in, like, even when it comes to arguments that couples have, or families are having, I always tell folks, what I need you to do is fumble through it. But what I want you first to start is tell whoever it is that you're going to try to talk to exactly what your intention is. And it might not be the greatest words, but then you kind of just make it happen to that point. So my intention is that that I'm supporting you. Okay. I'm going to hear everything you're about to say way differently than if you just go off on telling me why I shouldn't be doing something.
Right.
And so as a parent, if we come from that perspective of like, I'm wanted to keeping you safe, and I really don't really want your hand to touch that burner, because it's going to burn you. So we can have a long conversation about it. However, my intention is to keep you safe. So I don't need to tell you why I don't want you to touch the stove.
Right.
So when people are in a relationship, if they start with that perspective, and offer one another that neutral space to be able to hear then what they're trying to say, and then feed it back to them, of, this is what I heard. And then when we say that, then like, oh no, that's not even close to what I meant to say, or what I was meaning to convey. If we give each other that amazing, amazing gift to stay in a neutral place, to be able to hear what it is they're trying to communicate, we're going to hear it much more clearer. And we're creating a space so that they can better define it and explain it. So then I can better hear what you're trying to explain.
Yeah.
And it's a two-way street. My ex, we had this incredible way to be able to communicate, like super incredible. Most of the time, didn't ever need to actually have verbal words. It was just, there's so much that would happen that we were that in tune to pay attention to just about everything. Annoying I'm sure from their perspectives. Then I'm like, your breathing just changed. What do you think about? What's going on? I'm like, quit it. I'm like, I'm sorry. It's, but I remember there was this one, almost an argument about getting up from Sunday breakfast stuff. And there was something about whoever cooks usually does the cleanup, the other one does the cleanup kind of thing. And so in that conversation, what I heard was that I don't do enough cleaning. It might have been because I didn't have enough coffee yet, but and I'm like, what? I always do the cleanup. You always cook. What's the problem? I'm going to get to it. I am getting there. So it was the pause moment of like, hold on.
Yeah.
What do you think I heard? Or what do you think I said? What did you hear? There was a recognition of like, that didn't come across the way that I was expecting it to. So getting that feedback, and I'm like, this is what I heard. No, because my intention was, oh my God, that'd be so great because I want to get to these other things so that we can still have a day together. I'm like, oh, so didn't hear that. I'm on board with that. Let's do that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the communication piece is so valuable when we're talking about relationships, especially like the more intimate relationships. And I think it's a tool that most people, at least I know my generation, did not, and I think it's improving, just hasn't learned. It just hasn't been taught that like it's okay to hit the pause button and go, wait a minute, this is what I heard. Is that what you said? You know, and understanding like perception is reality, right? Like for so many people, like I don't know if you're familiar with Byron Katie or Loving What Is. I mean, that book shifted our marriage in ways that, you know, it's really hard for me to describe, but it's one of the tools that I offer to a lot of people is like, you know, let's take that moment to just say, hey, is this what happened? Is this what really happened? Right? Because all the things you're feeling about it are not necessarily what happened. And we don't know that unless we have sort of the agency to ask, right? And to say, hey, this is what I heard. Not necessarily this is what I'm feeling, because what you're feeling is yours. Right. But like, this is what I heard. And this is how I received it. What did you mean by it? And I think the other big piece to that too is having the ability, because like in the power structure of like parent and child, the kid isn't necessarily going to say, hey, this is what I heard, you know? So I think for me as a parent, one of the things that I really tried to implement with my kids is, you know, like you mentioned the stove, and that's what made me think about this, right? Is like a lot of times parents react out of fear. We don't want them to get hurt. We don't want them to do this, that, or the other. And then so they get yelled at or they get scolded. And what I've tried to do is take that same tool and kind of flip it with my kids and try to give them the permission to ask, which I know they won't because there's a power structure there that, you know, my 6-year-old isn't comfortable going, hey, Dad, hold on a minute. You know, she's just not going to do that. But I do have, because I'm in that place of power, the ability to stop the conversation or come back to the conversation and say, wait a minute, I'm acting out of fear. I'm worried for you. So what you may be perceiving as anger, or you may be perceiving as me telling you you're doing something wrong, is really me just trying to protect you. And I think it's important that parents take ownership of that role and recognize that like there's a power structure here that in an intimate relationship with consenting adults, you have the agency to go, wait a minute.
Right.
Let's pause. A child doesn't necessarily feel empowered, even if you tell them, you know? So I feel like there's a lot of ego to put aside in the parenting world, and like the humility of like, hey, I'm human too. And you're confounding to me as a child. I don't know what to do. Yeah. And I'm just trying to figure it out. I think there's a lot of freedom in that for the relationship. And I think that's where kids will grow up to have the ability to have those kind of communicative relationships that you're describing.
Well, you know, something with that is you can empower them too. So there is that power struggle potential. And even obviously not in the middle of a crisis is when you need to have a philosophical conversation about, I really want you to, you know, so having to circle back to it, sure. But laying some of that groundwork, but then recognizing as the adult also is giving them the power by, instead of them not asking, you asking, how did that sound? Like, what did you take away from that? What did you hear of what I just said? And a lot, that's where it gives them their power back. And then that they can also then be able to communicate it differently, because there isn't anybody under that microscope aspect. Well, that's what I heard you said. Oh, honey, I'm sorry, that's not what I meant. This is what I meant. And then you get to have that more expanded conversation.
Yeah, and it's so important. There's this great book called The Big Leap by a guy named Gay Hendricks that he talks about children being perfect observers and imperfect interpreters, where they see everything. But going back to like the language of our emotions, right? And like the bigger our vocabulary, the more we can analyze and interpret things. They don't have the vocabulary to understand necessarily what's happening. And so it's incumbent. What I took from that was that it's incumbent upon me as a parent to help them interpret what they're seeing and to give them a bigger and a broader vocabulary of, this isn't me, and like mom and dad don't fight every time you do this, right? Or whatever it is. It's like, this is what's really happening, and this is our perspective, and that's not a perfect solution by any means, you know. And it also helped me recognize that, like, it doesn't matter what I do, my kids are going to need therapy, or they're going to need their own personal development journey, because they're going to interpret things however they choose, right? Which peels back a lot of the, you know, I think, at least for me, like the guilt of what I'm doing. And it's like, man, if we're just honest, going back to like the honesty piece, the faster we're honest with them about what we're feeling and owning our own faults and our own upper limits and going like, I don't know what I'm doing, I'm trying to figure it out. Let's do it together. It creates a safe place for everyone. Because like I grew up, I mean, you know, my dad was one of those traditionally like dysfunctional 80s, 90s upbringings, right? That we hear so much about. And it wasn't until I had my second child, and he was 2 or 3 years old, where I was like, oh my God, now I understand why my dad was such an asshole. Because I'm standing here with 2 children who are just being kids, but I have no idea how to do this. I have zero tools, and I'm going to throw one of these kids across the room. And I was like, oh, that's what he was feeling. And I was able to sort of, in that moment, have a tremendous amount of like rapport, but also like forgiveness, and like all these things I had created as a kid about what I thought he felt about me was really probably just his own despair and not knowing what to do.
Right. Yeah.
And it's, you know, it was just such a great moment. I mean, the difference is that it was in that moment that I went, okay, I've got to go develop tools because I don't have them. Where I don't know that he made that choice, you know. But neither here nor there. I just think the communication piece that you brought up is so valuable in that those adult intimate relationships. And I don't think people are applying those same skill sets to how they're interacting with tiny humans as well.
Yeah. And that's, I love kids. I love interacting with kids. I have so much fun. Always have. And it's, I get to have a very different relationship with them than I think a lot of folks, just because giving them, I see them without restriction, but any human, that's kind of how I always try to show up, is there aren't restrictions and you get to be who you choose. And if I don't understand it, I'm probably going to ask you, like, what is that? What does that mean for you? And oh, wow, I'm totally on board with that. Rock on. You know, so having just that with them, I ask for them to educate me. And when you're doing that, especially with the kids, they're like, he's actually trying to hear me. You know, that's how it gets translated. And so it's a wonderful plus where it doesn't put up any of those guards and stuff potentially. One of the other things that I wanted to circle back about when it comes to that truth within relationships and communication is daily, every client that I have that I'm working with, and this has been a while, and you brought up that work with Byron Katie is that going into the asking more about, is that true? Asking more and more, is that true? And so coming from that more expanded place of it with the client is why I'm always asking them, no, that's a story you're telling. No, it's a story. No, it's a story. That's a story. That's a story. And so they're like, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, back it up then. What are the facts that led you to make that is a true statement? Well, they did this and they said that. Okay. Yep. But that doesn't equal this, because they didn't tell you this of what you've adopted.
Right.
That is a story. And so as people recognize that, I'm like, what if you show up in neutral and not go on this tangent about telling yourself and making up a story in it? Because if you don't have somebody telling you directly, then it's a story.
Right.
Very, very simple. So if we don't do that, it clears so much of that static that can happen in any of our communications. And so I think that was probably one of the most empowering things that I love when clients will start shifting into doing that and policing those words, and that whole like, all right, that's a story. It's probably true, but it's still a story. I'm going to wait till I get to communicate with that person and find out.
Yeah. What I love about the Byron Katie thing is she asks, is this true? And of course, we always respond yes, right? Like whatever the situation is. Well, is that true? Your dad doesn't love you. Well, yeah. And then it's like, well, is it absolutely true? And that shifts just that word, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then that shifts it to like, well, no. And so it's sort of like a reasonable doubt, right? Like if there's a reasonable doubt there, then we have to start to question ourselves if we're willing to be honest and open, right?
Exactly.
And teachable, which is often a hard thing. Yeah, so good, man. I love the conversation. I'm so grateful for you taking some time today to
thank you.
to have it and unpack some of these things.
Fun.
I feel like this is kind of a good place to wrap it up.
Sure.
But if there's something else on your mind that you want to share, if there's something you feel like it's on your heart and you want to bring up, I'm down to play.
Awesome.
It's I almost said abnormal. It's unusual to find people who are willing to have these types of conversations and really get into that kind of stuff. So it's been fun for me.
I thrive in it. That to me that's like the greatest pastime for me is unpacking everybody's thoughts and feelings and all of that, and the philosophy of why something is their truth. And I get that's probably really different for a lot of folks, but that's what I love doing. And the work that I get to do, and that's the thing, is I I don't work a day in my life, not one. I happen to have my hobby and my passion happens to be a career. And so I get paid for it too. It's just, it's really great and amazing for me. But it's investing into people. And it's so rare, unfortunately, that people give a space that they can ask some of these deeper questions and walk it through. And to show up in neutral for somebody might be the first time that's ever happened. And when we do that, we're not, again, telling that story of what's happening, and it allows them to be who they want, or to pivot and change what they want to be. Like I'm not showing up that well. All right. And so that, I think if people were to use just that part of shifting in their communication, of recognizing somebody else is going through something, and give them the space if they feel that that's appropriate. And I usually say that's always appropriate, because the universe is going to align you with who you need to be in front of always. So if that's going through drive-through and like, wow, you're having a rough day, huh? That sucks. And they're like, yeah, sorry, you shouldn't know that. I'm like, you're right, but you're still human, and all right, I'll say a prayer for you. How's that? So like, awesome. Like, yeah, thank you. Just those small things are so big that we can do. And it doesn't, in the other part is that it doesn't take away from our energy system. It actually feeds us. It actually boosts our immune system by doing random acts of kindness and all that kind of thing. But just how kind can we be to be able to show up in neutral? That's probably one of the most incredible gifts that we can give every human on the planet, is if we show up to be with them in neutral and allow them the space to be able to show up how they want to. And it's actually a requirement for me now for workshops and getting to work with folks. If they're not doing that, then no, we're not doing that. So you need to find another therapist. And that's even massage wise. Like if you're not doing the stuff that I'm asking you to do outside to help you be better with you, I've only got you for about an hour. So
Yeah.
rest on you, dude. So, so
Yeah.
it's that same thing of giving everybody like, all right, well, why isn't it working? Or, just asking more questions with people. And when we can do it from that neutral space, it doesn't put anybody, it literally will take their ego and set it aside, and they're not under attack. And so they don't have to come from that place of they actually truly want to hear what I have to say. Well, that's new. Sorry about that, but probably for a lot of folks.
Yeah.
So, yay.
That's fascinating, man. I love it. I appreciate your time today. I think, we definitely brought tons of value and tons of insight, and hopefully for some people listening, some fresh perspective on ways that they can show up differently.
Great.
So then the last thing I'll ask, I actually have two random fun, just kind of get to know you conversational questions.
Okay.
One is, what is the best $100 that you've spent in the last 12 months?
It was for a workshop that I took for taking your events, your live events, and putting them out like through Zoom. It was, I knew way over my head thinking of all the tech stuff, but they literally walked you through it. And like, if you've seen some of the big events, so like this company actually does it for like Tony Robbins and like massive stadium kind of stuff. And there's a ton of, monitors up and everything else. So that's what they did. And they literally walked you through absolutely every one of those steps. And the whole thing was $99.
That's awesome.
It was the most incredible thing because it was where I wanted to go with my practice, but no idea how that was going to work.
Yeah.
In my practice, it's a team of one. So I have to be IT, I have to be marketing, all of that. So in that weekend, it's rare that I get to at the end of the day and I'm like, okay, I need to check out. There's no more going in. And so I really love when that happens. And that was the best that I've done all year long was because I got to have this. There was 1,500 people on it.
Wow.
That we're all live together. It was so intimate. The entire weekend, we were all together. Like we were sitting in each other's living rooms is what it felt like. It was so cool.
That's awesome.
And so I just took all of that back in. And so that really, I can't wait. That's where I really wanted to shift my practice so everybody could do that and have that, how I get to create that same environment that I do, because I really take that seriously with the environment that I create for a workshop because of really transformational things will happen in that weekend. And I'm like, how do I do that from a microphone and a camera? So that was the best. So I'm super excited to be able to experience that with everybody. So
that's awesome.
That was it.
Yeah, no, that's huge. I find a lot of times those events are worth 10 times what you pay for them. The residual value that they bring. I tell people all the time, man, if you can get into an event, even virtual, I have a hard time with the virtual events personally. My ability to stay focused on the content at hand, I'm on my phone, I got kids running around, like it gets hard. But yeah, events like that can be, tremendously valuable. The other question I want to ask you is, give me a book recommendation of a book that you read that you felt like created a major shift in you.
The book that was the most influential and powerful for my entire life was Sacred Contracts by Carolyn Mace.
Okay.
Hands down, I have to even think about what it is.
That was a quick response. That was not even a hesitation. So Sacred Contracts.
Yeah, Carolyn Mace, MYSS. It is. I started reading it when I first started massage school, and that's literally where everything in my life really, really changed before I started my practice. So that was 18 years ago. And I actually go through that book once a quarter. I still go through it again because there's so much in it. And what that did was, just like we talked about today, that's how I arrived at the truth that I have. is it literally had to unpack it all, figure out why that is a truth. And what I love, she was actually brought up by nuns, but she has this global perspective of, she'll take a concept and then she'll run it through most of the major philosophies in the world. So she'll run it through from a Christian perspective to a Buddhist tradition, and it takes just that one concept and runs it all the way through those. And I'm like, oh, I'm all in. So I love to be able to do that. That was I had a while to be able to be all right with the G word. I'm like, not doing that. Nope. And through her, I got to see it again, and then get to fall back in love with the universal creator again, through without the filters that I had of any trauma that might have happened, kind of thing. So it was the most transformational, and still is. Every quarter I make sure that I get back to it.
Awesome.
What else I'm doing. So yay.
I love it. Great. We'll add that to, we have a book club. We have on the website just all the recommendations of, the books that have created major shifts in people's lives, and not with the intention of, I don't have Amazon affiliate links. We're not trying to sell anything to anybody. It's just, someone's going to listen to this. They're going to really resonate with the things that we've talked about. And you came to these conclusions through something. And I have found that traditionally there's a book out there somewhere to support someone on that journey. So, we just create that as a resource for people who are looking for ways to choose differently. And so I appreciate that. And I appreciate the time.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, definitely.